Good evening, y'all. Wow, that mic is plenty loud. I guess everybody can hear. So I think we probably need to start in Ezra chapter 5 and verse 1. What? I thought we started in Zechariah. Ezra chapter 5 and verse 1. Ezra chapter 5 and verse 1. We've got a situation where the people have come back, but things have just stalled. When they got back in 538, 536, really excited about building this new temple. But there'd been a lot of opposition. And so the people quit because of the threats. So who is God going to bring on the scene to help the people to, hey, we need to get back on the program and get busy building the temple? Who's going to step up? You see that there? Is that chapter 5? What do you got in verse 1? Haggai and Zechariah, Patrick. That's exactly right. Haggai and Zechariah are prophets. And I kind of want you to just picture these two guys. Haggai is a construction guy. He's got his tool belt. He knows how to drive nails. And he's saying, hey, you guys, you've got your house built. Now we need to get God's house built. In fact, we should have built it first. You need to consider your ways. Get some lumber, get some nails, and let's get back at it. He's a get her done kind of guy. All right? So that's Haggai. Well, about 2 months later, God's going to bring Zechariah on the scene. And Zechariah says, oh man, you got to see this new temple. This is going to be wonderful. God's glory is going to come. And Zechariah is the big picture guy who says some amazing things to try to get folks to come alongside and get with the program. Which one did they need, Haggai or Zechariah? Yeah, Dan, they needed both. They need the nuts and bolts guy, and they needed the big picture visionary. Both of those have their place, and they're both working together. So you've written down by Ezra chapter 5 and verse 1, 520 BC. 520 BC. Now go on over to Ezra chapter 6 and go to verse 14, and then we'll start doing your review. Chapter 6 and verse 14. Somebody read that for me. Ezra 6 and verse 14. Jump right in whenever you get there. King of Persia. Thank you very much. So we got our Persian kings, and 4 years later, we got her done. So we've got Haggai and Zechariah. They're tag team prophets. So you really need, I presume you've studied Haggai. Was that last week? Or pretty close? Good. So Haggai and Zechariah. And so now on your first worksheet, you're going to start giving me answers to the handout. Who said that? Who said that? And so you're going to go ahead and start telling me the answers to these particular quotes from the minor prophets. But now you recover from the shock of that test, we probably ought to think about the minor prophets. Why are they called minor prophets? Why are they called minor prophets? They're short. That's right. They're short books. When you're in literature class, and you think you're going to get a coach to teach your literature class, you think it's going to be an easy class, beware, if he has a master's in English lit, you're in trouble. I know from experience, okay? And so Moby Dick is not a short document, okay? So these are shorter books, but are some of the major prophets shorter than some of the minor prophets? Which one of the Lion's Den guys actually has less chapters than some of the minor prophets? Daniel, all right? So we're looking at a period from about 605 down to around 400 with these prophets. But the minor prophets start with Hosea, you guys can say it with me, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, you know them, right? Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. What I just realized is you don't know them. Or you just weren't willing to speak. And it is the hardest books of the Old Testament for sure. And actually in the Bible that the Jews had, these are all one scroll. All the minor prophets were in one scroll. So in the Hebrew Bible, there were only 22 books because these were all counted as one book. And so when you had 1st and 2nd Samuel, it was just Samuel. 1st and 2nd Kings, just Kings. 1st and 2nd Chronicles, just Chronicles. And they were in scrolls, and they were big and they were heavy. So the minor prophets is the 12-fold book. There's nothing minor about them other than the fact that their size is smaller. So what we're going to exercise our experience now is of these prophets are telling us about Jesus. Every Old Testament book is pointing to Jesus. Now I will confess, I struggle with Song of Solomon. But otherwise, every Old Testament book is telling us someone is coming. And so you're going to get to walk through that with me right now. Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. You can only miss it 11 times, so when you answer, the other people will be able to pick up that's not the one. You want to go ahead with me? Which prophet said that? It's either about John the Baptist or it's about Jesus. Which prophet? Malachi. That's right. It's Malachi. Yes. And so you're going to kind of notice that some of these don't have all of the minor prophets listed. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who is my companion, says the Lord of hosts. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. Which prophet? Go ahead and write it down. Once you give the answer, that was Malachi. Write it down. Any ideas? Zechariah. That is correct. It is Zechariah. Kind of watch that. Out of Egypt have I called my son. It's not Zechariah. It's not Malachi. But if you start with an H letter, you might be on track. That's Hosea. That's okay. Yeah, that's Hosea. It was one of the H's, so you were close. Hosea. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. Go ahead. The prophet is Zechariah. Zechariah. Next one, I expect everybody to get this one. This is really easy. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions. And also on my men servants and my maid servants I will pour out my spirit in those days. You can say Acts 2 and you'd be right. But it's quoted from the minor prophet Joel. Very good. Joel. Then let's try this one. So they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter. That princely price they set on me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord for the potter. Zechariah again. Zechariah. How about this one? Who was it told me they preached? Oh, I think Steve Klein spoke on this one. On that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down, and repair its damages. I will raise up its ruins and rebuild as it is in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the Gentiles who are called by my name. Which prophet? Oh, come on. Steve wants to hear that you all nailed this one when I see him tomorrow at school. Amos. Quoted in Acts chapter 15. Amos. So go ahead and write that one down. Here's one you all will get, I'm sure. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though you're a little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from of old, from everlasting. Micah chapter, and my 8th graders know this, chapter 5, verse 2. Micah 5 and verse 2. So when Jesus was born, the people knew the prophecy of Micah 5 and in verse 2. Let's try this one. Yes, he shall build the temple of the Lord. He shall bear the glory and shall sit and rule on his throne. So he shall be priest on his throne, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both. Our survey says Zechariah. Zechariah. And you're seeing the quotes there in chapter 6 and verse 13. How about this one? Hear, O Joshua, the high priest, you and your companions who sit before you, for they are a wonder sign. For behold, I am bringing forth my servant, the branch. Your prophet is Zechariah. Do you see where we're going with this? So many of the quotes about Jesus are found in Zechariah. Now, brother, be ready here in just a minute. Afterward, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. It's an H and it's not Haggai. Hosea. Wrapping it up, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And the fathers will turn their attention to the children, and the children turn their attention to the fathers. The very last words of the Old Testament. So what's the prophet? Malachi. See, I was hoping that through the summer series, all of this was coming together. And so we've got these earlier prophets like Hosea and Joel and Amos, these 800 and 700 prophets. And then we're getting down to the latter prophets like Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. You can kind of see them as a group. So let me see if we can do a couple things to kind of help connect some of that. And so as we see this from our spiritual heritage, we're going to see these prophets, and when they're speaking, we're going to know that Isaiah and Micah are contemporaries. They're going to say some of the exact same things because the Holy Spirit's directing them, and they're going to help rescue Judah when Sennacherib comes in 701 BC. So Isaiah plus Micah plus good King Hezekiah is going to rescue or save Judah. But later, Babylon is going to come in and it's going to zap Judah. But Habakkuk and Zephaniah and Jeremiah are getting the people ready for the Babylonian invasion. And Jeremiah is saying, give up, give in, it's too late. You're going into captivity and it's going to be 70 years. So Jeremiah is going to lament the destruction of Jerusalem. He's going to sing a 5-chapter funeral song in the Lamentations. And so we've got some heroes that are really homesick. Daniel in chapter 9 is saying, God, isn't it about time? Jeremiah said it'd be 70 years. Isn't it about time that we get to go back home? And so Daniel is anticipating that. He's anticipating going home. Ezekiel's been by the river and been working with the captives. And then you've got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And of course you've got King Nebuchadnezzar. And then you've got good King Jehoiachin, who has been taken into captivity. And of course Belshazzar in 539 is going to see the handwriting on the wall. And in comes Darius the Mede, and the Medes and the Persians are going to come in and crush Babylon, just as God said. And so there's going to be a guy by the name of Cyrus who's going to announce, you all can go home. But I want you to see where Esther fits into all this, ladies. Esther fits in between Ezra chapter 6 and Ezra chapter 7. And so she's going to rescue the people from annihilation and keep her wicked husband from carrying out that execution. So Cyrus is named almost 150 years before he's born. And God says he's going to be my shepherd. Isaiah 44 and Isaiah 45. And he's going to build a house for me. And so Cyrus comes on the scene and he says, my captive peoples, you can go home. You people from Judah, you go home and you take back what was taken from you in the destruction of the temple. And so you have Ezra and Nehemiah and Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi. So these exiles are desiring to go back home. So they're going to hurry back to Zion, hurry back to Jerusalem. Hope that helps kind of bring it all together. And so I've just used up a good bit of my Zechariah time. But I felt like it was important for you, since you've been through this all summer long, to kind of see it all come together and see Zechariah in the picture of the whole segment. And I'll be glad to share plenty of additional information electronically with you. So Zechariah is the person whom God remembers. This is the person whom God knows. It's a very popular name. 27 men in the Bible had the name Zechariah. He's a priest. He's returned to Jerusalem from Babylon between 538 and 536. And as we've already learned, Haggai is a contemporary. Before we go any farther, what are your questions from background? Zechariah, Haggai, tag team teachers, preachers, to motivate people to rebuild what? What is their goal? Rebuild the temple. The temple. And so that's what they're going to be working on. And just kind of run through some of the events and the periods of it. You're going to see in 586 that temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. By 539, Babylon has fallen to the Persians. Now Cyrus is going to issue a decree that everybody can go back to their own land and they can rebuild. How many of God's people go back home? Any ideas? Can you give me in the millions or the thousands or any rough estimate of how many people go back home in that first group? There's 3 groups that go back. Anybody remember? Between 45 and 50,000. That's estimated to be about 1/10 of the population of the Jews. About 1/10. It's called a remnant. It's a small portion of the people that go back. Other people who stay in Babylon, stay now in the Persian realm, are going to encourage them, send supplies, send finances, but most of them didn't go back. And so typically 536 is the date of that first return under Zerubbabel or Zerubbabel. He's a prince. He is a direct descendant of the kings of Judah, like David. And so he's coming back as a prince to help lead the return. But there's not just a prince there. There's a priest, a high priest. Anybody know the high priest's name? We're going to get to him here momentarily. Joshua. And so you've got a priest and a king. And sometimes his name is spelled Yeshua. There's another guy that I'd like you to think about who's a prophet and a priest and a king, and his name is Joshua. You know what I'm talking about? It's Jesus. It's Yeshua. Jesus is the prophet. He's the priest. He's the king. He's a Joshua like the army commander. He's a Joshua like the priest that Zechariah is going to speak of in chapter 3. And so I want you to see Jesus. If you miss everything else, see Jesus. Zechariah is going to give you more prophecies about Jesus than any other Old Testament prophet other than Isaiah. Okay? But there's another document in the Old Testament that's going to give you more prophecies than either Isaiah or Zechariah. And that's the Psalms. And we often neglect them. And so the Old Testament is telling us someone is coming. He's going to be a priest, he's going to be a king, and he's going to be a prophet. And so the people started working. But then the people who had lived in the community and absorbed the area said, we don't want you here. And we're going to run you off, and we're going to report you back to Darius, the king of Persia, and we're going to shut this thing down. So guess what the Jews do from 536 to 520? A bunch of nothing. They get their house built. They're all taking care of their place. They've got paneled houses. But God's house, grass in the foundation. That's all there is. So I want you to go with me for a moment to Ezra chapter 3. Help me find, in Ezra chapter 3, help me find the heart of the people and what's going on in Ezra chapter 3. When they get back home in 536, they're so excited. They've got the foundation and things are looking great. But about somewhere around verses 13 or 14 or 15 in Ezra 3, what's the circumstance? What's happening? Do they have the foundation built? I'm thinking that's where that is. Anybody want to take it for me?
Verse 6, it says the foundations of the temple of the Lord had not been laid.
Yes, okay. So verse 6, Dan, you say it had not been laid?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. But let's keep going on down in verse 10. And let's notice that the builders had laid the foundation in verse 10. And then notice in verse 12, but many of the older priests, Levites, and family leaders who'd seen the first temple, what are they doing?
Crying.
They're crying. They're weeping. The temple of Solomon was so big, so impressive. And this little foundation looks like nothing compared to what we had before. So the old people, realizing our sins caused our temple to be destroyed, and they're seeing this puny little thing, and they're just crying over all of what we've got now versus what we had then. What are the young people doing? Keep reading. What are the young people doing?
Celebrate.
They're celebrating. They're cheering. They're saying, yes, this is great. This is good. This is wonderful. That happens to us too. Sometimes we get older and we think, oh, I remember when College View was 450 people, and it's not that anymore. And we used to have 500 young people in the congregation. Of course, we're exaggerating, and it's not like that anymore. But the young people, can they be excited about serving the Lord, whether there's 2 or 200? Absolutely. Can they be excited? Hey, we built this foundation. The young people are excited about this. So go to Zechariah chapter 4. Zechariah chapter 4, and notice kind of the end of the point in Zechariah chapter 4 and about verse 10. What is Zechariah having to tell these people who they can remember the former glory? They can remember the great temple of Solomon, and now they're looking at this puny little temple. And what does Zechariah tell them? Don't what? Maybe I'm just dreaming that up. Is there something there about verse 10? Don't despise the day of small things. This temple may look puny. It may look little. But guess what? Who's going to come to that temple? The Lord is. Yeah, the Lord is going to come to that temple. And by the way, when the tabernacle was erected, did God's Shekinah enter the tabernacle? Did God's glory come into that? And everybody knew God was there. When Solomon's temple was built, did God's Shekinah, did God's glory come into that temple? And it looked really impressive? Do you read about God's glory coming into this temple? It didn't until Jesus walked in. And when Jesus walked in that temple, the glory of the Lord was there. Because He's the real King that's coming. And that's Zechariah's major point. You guys need to stay focused. God's going to do some great things. This might look small, but when the Lord's there, there's nothing small about it. Okay? So you really need Zechariah. You really need to see why we're driving the nails, why we're hauling this lumber. It's not about this physical edifice. It's about the presence of the Lord. And so that's what we have there in Zechariah chapter 4. So kind of getting a picture of contents, just to see the big picture. Now we're going to do all 14 chapters, okay, Ken? So chapters 1 through 6 are going to be 8 different symbolic visions. It's going to be a lot like the book of Revelation. You're not going to do well with Revelation if you haven't dealt with Ezekiel and Zechariah first. It's just going to be really hard for you. And so you've got those, and then God's going to call His people to come back to Him. Return to me with your heart. Don't just come up with all these different fast days. You need to repent in your heart, not just do without a day's worth of food. And then you're going to have, God is going to deal with the nations. I know the nations have been beating on you, and I don't like it, and I gave them opportunity to punish you, but they went too far. And so I'm going to shake things up, just like Haggai chapter 2. I'm going to shake things up, and I'm going to deal with the Persians who are pummeling you. Don't think I've forgotten you. I've not forgotten my promises, and I've not forgotten my people, and I am going to come, and I'm going to deal with my people, and God's people's future is going to be glorious. That's Zechariah. That's the book of Zechariah. So I hope that you can see it in that kind of a format. So we've got this writing that's different than what we're used to. It's often called apocalyptic. I saw some note this morning that's talked about the flooding in Florida, they said it's an apocalypse. Do you know what the word apocalypse means? That's the name for the book of Revelation. I just told you what it means. The apocalypse is the revelation. But we use it to refer to some kind of dramatic end times judgment. These are highly symbolic terms used to be understood in poetic form, not to be taken literally, and Zechariah is full of that. The angels are talking all the time, 21 times. The angels are saying, here, Zechariah, here, this is what's happening. This is what you know what's happening. You see that, and that's what the angels are doing. And you have all of that symbolism and many similarities. I'm going to show you a couple of those. You've got the 4 horsemen. You've got the 2 olive trees. You've got the candlestick or the lampstand. And then you've got all these prophecies about Jesus. Remember how many of those were in Zechariah? Zechariah is telling us a lot about Jesus. He's the branch. He's the sprout of David. And so I'd like to just walk through a little bit of that. Kenny, what time are we finishing up? 10 after. Thank you very much. Can you think of any prophecies in the New Testament from Zechariah? Can you think of any prophecies from Zechariah specifically relating to Jesus?
Came riding on the donkey.
Riding on the donkey into Jerusalem. Absolutely. In fact, I think that was one of the ones that we went through. Where would that be in Zechariah? Go ahead and start looking. I mean, you only have 14 chapters. You'll find it. Where would you find the riding on the donkey, on the foal of the donkey? You might as well get started at chapter 1. You know, my 8th graders, they have to learn to survey. It's not chapter 1, not chapter 2, not chapter 3. Guess what? It's not 4, 5, 6, or 7, or 8. Brody? Have a guess? 9? Oh, beautiful. I knew you were brilliant. All right, chapter 9, about verse 9. And so when Jesus comes riding on that colt, his disciples went, wait a second. Zechariah said it was going to be that way. He was going to come humble and meek and riding on the foal of a donkey. That's him. He's not riding some black or white big stallion. He's riding a colt that's never been ridden before. Not very impressive, but it's absolutely what God had prophesied. Riding on it. What's another one that you would think of? I tried to throw some of them up there. Maybe this would help. There's your outline. Yeah, that's not going to do it. Here's your pictures. Give me some more prophecies about Jesus. I wanted to take time to read through the first 3 chapters of Zechariah. Let me give you some of those pretty quickly then. There you go. He is the root. He is the branch. Revelation 5 and verse 5 talks about Jesus as the root of David. He is the king. He is king and priest. Hebrews chapter 6 and in verse 20. He is riding on a donkey. Matthew 21 verses 4 and 5. And he is also the one who is pierced. They will look on the one they have pierced. John 19 verse 37. And also when he is slain as the shepherd, the sheep will scatter. Let's all go back to Zechariah and look with me, if you will, in chapter 3. Zechariah chapter 3. Who are we looking at here in chapter 3? Joshua or Yeshua. Sometimes it's spelled Jes. What's his role? He's high priest. But what's on his clothes? How does yours read there? Putrid filth. Some have told me, and I don't know if it's right or not, some of the Hebrew scholars, that that's actually a description of vomit. That can you imagine going to the high priest and him having throw up all over him? that he's defiled, that he's got sin all over him. So what's going to need to happen if he's going to be able to intercede for you? What does he first have to deal with? He got to deal with his own sins first. That's like, the book of Leviticus, chapters 8 and 9. You got to clean up Aaron and his sons before they can intercede for you. And so Joshua is all covered up with this refuse. And who is accusing him? Satan. Revelation 12. The accuser of our brethren, Satan. And the Lord rebuke you, Satan. May the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Isn't this man a burning stick snatched from the fire? He's like he's about to be burned up. Now Joshua was dressed with filthy clothes as he stood before, this says, the angel. So the angel of the Lord spoke to those standing before him, take off his filthy clothes. Then he said to him, see, I have removed your guilt from you, and I will clothe you with splendid robes. God's going to purify him. Can you think of another prophet that recognized he was so defiled and he needed God's cleansing before he could do the work? Isaiah. Yeah, Isaiah chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. And we've already noted in chapter 4, don't despise the day of small things. In the remaining time, I'd like you to look with me to chapter 7. To chapter 7, verses 9 through 11. Chapter 7, verses 9 through 11. The word of the Lord came to Zechariah. The Lord of hosts says this, make fair decisions, show faithful love and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor, and do not plot evil in your hearts against one another. But they refused to pay attention and turned a stubborn shoulder. They closed their ears so they could not hear. They made their hearts like a rock so as not to obey the law of the Lord, the law of the words that the Lord of hosts had sent by his Spirit through the earlier prophets. Therefore great anger came from the Lord of hosts. Who were they to take care of that they had failed to take care of? Orphans, widows, people who ain't from around here, foreigners, Yankees, poor people. What I'm observing, having spent a lot of time over the last 20 years in college campuses, what I'm observing is young people have a hunger to serve. They have a hunger to serve poor people. They have a hunger to serve orphans. They have a hunger to serve widows. Are we doing that? Now, there are right ways to do it and there are wrong ways to do it. But we need to think about, as the young people are looking at us, how involved are we in helping orphans? How involved are we in helping widows? How much are we doing to help poor people? How are we feeling toward the people from Central and South America who are coming here in droves? You see, the condemnation of the people of Zechariah's day is you're not caring for the poor. You're not caring for the widows. You're not caring for the orphans. You're not caring for the strangers. And so young people are looking at us and saying, what are we doing to help other people? Are we sharing the gospel with them? Are we welcoming them into our home? Are we reaching out and making sacred selections of these little ones who don't have a dad to care for them? So don't despise the day of small things. It may seem like a little thing for you to be a foster parent or to adopt a child in your home. It may seem like a little thing for you to go and serve the widows. It may seem like a little thing for you to help the kid whose dad doesn't have time for him. But those are the very things that got God's people into captivity because they failed to do it. And so young people are seeing what God says for us to do. Young people, whether we do it or not, you need to. Each of us has obligation and each of us has responsibility. So I hope you'll be thinking about that. What are your questions? What are your observations in the remaining time? What are your observations? Zechariah. Is it okay to quit early? Okay. I would love to walk through the whole document with you. It's well worth your time to read it. Thank you very much.